The Colorado Supreme Court has ruled former President Donald Trump is not eligible to be on the state's primary ballot and is in fact disqualified from being president again. In a 4-3 decision, the court ruled Trump violated the U.S. Constitution by inciting the mob that attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Ed O'Keefe is at the White House with more.
Anne-Marie, good morning. This does not apply to all states, only Colorado, and it hinges on a clause that dates back to the Civil War. If it stands, it would be unprecedented, but the former president's legal team says they plan to appeal, likely setting up a big decision for the U.S. Supreme Court.
We will fight for America like no one has ever fought before.
Campaigning in Iowa last night, Donald Trump made no mention of his latest legal hurdle.
They're after you. I just happened to be standing in their way.
But late Tuesday, a divided Colorado Supreme Court declared the former president ineligible to run again in that state, citing the Constitution's insurrection clause. The legal challenge to Trump's eligibility is in response to his actions on January 6, 2021.
And we're going to the Capitol.
Section 3 of the 14th Amendment disqualifies officers of the United States who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding office. At issue in Colorado is whether the president is such an officer and whether Trump engaged in insurrection or rebellion. 4 of the 7 justices ruled yes to both questions. All 7 were appointed by Democratic governors. We do not reach these conclusions lightly, the court wrote, adding later their ruling takes the country into uncharted territory. The ruling would only apply to Colorado. Similar challenges in other states have failed or are still pending.
This is really an unprecedented and, to be honest, unexpected ruling.
CBS News election law expert David Becker.
What the Colorado Supreme Court has just done is to kind of kickstart the process by which the United States Supreme Court is likely to rule. And their ruling absolutely will have some impact on whether or not Donald Trump, if he gains the Republican nomination, is eligible to appear on the general election ballot.
The Trump campaign, which began fundraising off the decision within hours, says it's planning to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, calling the Colorado ruling a completely flawed decision. And the former president's Republican rivals seem to agree. Vivek Ramaswamy called the ruling wrong and incorrect. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said it should be reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And former governors Chris Christie and Nikki Haley had notably similar statements, saying Trump shouldn't be prevented from being president by a court, but instead by the voters. Here at the White House and the Biden re-election campaign, Anne-Marie, they had no comment.
So, as you mentioned, there are similar challenges in other states that are still pending, but there are other states where this argument was rejected. So why were things different in this state?
Different set of judges, essentially, and what they have argued is not so much that he perhaps was ineligible. There had been an earlier ruling by a lower state court that agreed that perhaps he was ineligible, but was essentially reading the Constitution in a way that suggested he's not somebody that this applies to because the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't explicitly say president. The state Supreme Court is saying, no, he is an officer of the United States at the time. This applies to him. He should be ruled ineligible. But what they also said is this doesn't take effect until at least January 4th. If the Supreme Court would like to take up the case before then it doesn't apply until or unless the U.S. Supreme Court rules on it. So in essence, what they're saying is go ahead, High Court, take this, settle this matter for the states, and we'll see whether or not they take it, and we'll see whether or not they rule on it. But important to remember in this case, it only would apply to Colorado, which in recent elections anyway has been a mostly reliably blue state.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, which brings us to sort of the politics of this all. It was really interesting that the others running for the 2024 GOP nomination did not agree with this decision. But I wonder if there's a way for them to use this to their benefit, or if, like we've seen in all the other legal challenges that the former president has faced, this may actually benefit him.
In the short term, it's likely going to benefit him because he's already raising money off of it. It feeds into the narrative that the courts and the Biden administration are after him, which is not necessarily the case. And, it also helps those that are making the argument that he brings too much chaos. Nikki Haley, most notably, Chris Christie more explicitly. They continue to say, how can the party have someone like him who's going to have to spend so much of 2024 in court trying to win over general election voters? We need to move on to somebody else. Ultimately, we'll see what the Supreme Court decides and what GOP primary voters opt to do as well.
We will. Ed, thank you very much. Well, coming up this afternoon, Colorado Secretary of State Janet Griswold joins the stream to discuss the state Supreme Court's decision. You can catch that right here just after 2 p.m. Eastern. In 2023, former President Trump spent a lot of time dealing with various legal battles, and that is not likely to change in the new year. Already, trial dates are being set in Washington, New York City, Florida, and Atlanta. We should note some of these dates are subject to change. The legal editor for Politico joined America Decides yesterday, and he says Trump's legal troubles are only going to escalate in 2024.
The federal prosecution over his efforts to subvert the 2020 election and derail the transfer of power on January 6th posed certainly the most urgent legal risks for Trump. Of his 4 cases, that trial is currently scheduled to go first.
Starts in March.
Yes, that's right. March 4th, I believe.
And based on your read of the filings and Judge Chutkan's statements, how long do you expect that trial could last?
I mean, the prosecution has said that it would take 1 or 2 months just to put on their own case, and then Trump would have time to put on his defense. So that this could last several months at a minimum. No president or former president until Donald Trump has ever been prosecuted for criminal acts that he committed while in office. Trump is now facing 4 different indictments for all sorts of alleged malfeasance. And because this is so unprecedented in American history, the Supreme Court has never resolved the extent of presidential immunity in a context like this. And so the Supreme Court almost certainly will have to resolve this in the first few months of 2024. And depending on how quickly SCOTUS wants to act, will depend on whether, or will determine whether Trump can go to trial by that March 4th trial date that we talked about.
Well, you can catch more conversations like that one on America Decides. It streams today at 5 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News.